Right, so again, good afternoon everyone. I hope you had a good lunch and that you can still stay awake for another 45 minutes after eating a full meal. A year ago I presented Buildship 1.0 here at the Gradle Summit, and since then a year has passed obviously, and a lot has happened on the Buildship side, and today we'd like to give you an update on where we are with Buildship 2.0 as well as with Buildship 1.0.16, which is the last release as part of the 1.0x stream, basically. As I said, a lot has happened over the past 12 months. We're included in various distributions, so we are included since Eclipse Mars, the 0.1 release. We have, of course, people use it throughout the download of the distribution, but also we have additional people using it from the marketplace, especially those that are more cutting edge, want to use a newer version. We also get quite a bit of feedback in the forum from our users, as well as discussions, feedbacks, problems. We also have bug reports or feature reports in Bugzilla that's actively used. We also had some open source partnerships, meaning some companies want certain features with a high priority, and basically we make a deal, we implement it in the open source solution, and they compensate us for doing it with high priority. There have also been various community contributions that have made it into the release. And in general, there's been quite a bit of community feedback. If we look at the schedule, so Buildship 1.0.15 is included in Eclipse Neon, which was released just a few days ago.
Yeah, just
on Wednesday.
Wednesday, exactly.
Yeah, 2 days ago. And Buildship 2.0 will either be in the 0.1 release in September or in the 0.2 release that comes out in December. So it depends a bit on certain things in Gradle Core, how fast we have them available for Buildship. And we'll go into both those releases. So the Buildship 1.0.16 release is the last of the Buildship 1.0x releases. We used patch versions, even though it's a bit of an understatement to use patch versions for them. What is in Buildship, what is in Eclipse Neon is 1.0.15, so we did one more release since. So basically the focus was still on the user and not on the build master. So we're still giving a better experience to the build users when working with Gradle from within Eclipse. One thing we did very early on after the 1.0 release is to share the project configuration, or to make it shareable, such that when you check in the project configuration to your version control, other people can check it out and have a working setup. We've also made some improvements to the project synchronization. So we take more things from your build into account when we set up the project, like Java settings and so on. And we'll go into them. Stefan will demonstrate all that. We also isolated the class paths. So especially when you have different versions of a library on your class path in different projects, we used to export the libraries, and that wouldn't do the resolution of the dependency conflict. So now each project contains the transitive dependency tree, and nothing is re-exported. Right? So that way we don't have any conflicts between library versions between projects. We also made certain usability improvements. We'll also go into them in the demo bit. And also an important aspect is the performance. So we spent quite a bit of time on improving the performance, especially around the import. There was a lot of progress logging, etc., that really slowed down things unnecessarily. And we'll also see an example of how fast it is now to really import a really big project into Eclipse. Right. Then, and that's the 1.0.16 feature, it was basically to add some basic WTP support, right, with a, I would say, very elegant, pragmatic solution to not come up with the full story of custom integration points, etc. Right. And we'll see those things in action in a second when we do the demo. All right, so with that, I give over to Stefan.
So let's have a quick look what you can expect from the latest Buildship versions. I've prepared several workspaces here to show you each version. And we're going to start with Eclipse Neon, of course, which has just been released, and Buildship 1016, which you can get from the marketplace or from our update sites. So what I'm going to do first, of course, is just import some simple project. Has a very original name. And one of the first things you'll see, I imported this project before one day, and it's now asking me, hey, this project already has some Eclipse descriptors in it. Do you want to keep them, or do you want to override them? And we added this because users sometimes reported, okay, I wanted to start using Gradle, so I migrated from some other system, but I already had some existing descriptor files, and they were not cleaned up. It was not. They didn't, after the import, they didn't match exactly what was in my Gradle build, but there were some leftovers from my previous build system. So we now give you this option to say, yeah, please do a clean slate here. But we also give you the option to say, no, there are a few things in here that Gradle doesn't yet understand. I made some manual adjustments. Please keep whatever I did manually. So you can go both ways. And that option will at some point go away when the Gradle Eclipse integration supports everything that you can do in the eclipse.project.classpath file, which will be in Gradle 3.0. At that point, we will probably remove that option and say, well, you can model everything in Gradle, so there's no point in doing manual adjustments in Eclipse anymore. All right. So the first thing you'll notice is a nice usability improvement in the task view. You probably know how tasks look like when you run Gradle tasks on the command line. They're nicely grouped, and the same is now also true in Buildship. So if you're looking for, let's say, an verification task like check, then you no longer have this long list that you need to search through. If you don't want this, you can go into the options menu and say, hey, switch off the group tasks option, and you're back to the old behavior of just having one long list. And one feature that has been there before, but which I would just like to remind everybody of, because I think it's very useful, is this filter here that you can activate and then say, I'm searching for a task that's called check. So you can very easily search for those. Many people don't know that. OK, so I'm going to run my check task. And you'll see I ran 2 tests, because I have 2 tests in my little example project here. And one cool feature we added is that you can now rerun tests from the execution view. No matter if they failed or succeeded, you can say, hey, I want to run this test again, probably because you changed it. So let's just make this test fail. I'm going to save it, and then say, hey, Gradle, rerun this test. And as you can see, it fails, and we only ran exactly this one test that I selected. And now I'm going to make it pass again, and you can do the same in the editor. So you get this really nice integration that you're used to from Eclipse, where you have the JUnit plugin, and just right-click, run as JUnit test. Everybody knows that. That is now also possible with Gradle. So you can say right-click on any class or method, run as Gradle test. And the difference is that this will actually invoke your Gradle build. So if your test task has some dependencies like, oh, I first need to set up some database or some web server and maybe some tear down, like stop that web server again or delete that database, that test database again, then those will be run too. So it's a much richer integration than just running the tests via JUnit. All right, now this is a very, very simplistic project. What happens in pretty much any real-world setting is that at some point you have more sub-projects. And as you add them, you of course also want to import them into the IDE. And this is now very simple. So as soon as you add a sub-project like I've done here, I'll just include one, you can say, Gradle, please refresh the project. And as you'll see, this is also new. You can now refresh projects by just right-clicking on any Gradle file in the editor. Say, Gradle, please refresh this project, and you can see it automatically imported those 2 sub-projects that I selected. You can also rename your projects. Let's say I want to rename my project from example to hello. I tell Gradle to please refresh, and the name of the project is synchronized with the IDE. Now, what I have here is what could be a problem. I have two projects that have the simple name API in my project hierarchy. And so you can see I imported the first one, and it's called API in the Project Explorer. So naively, this would fail if I now try to refresh my project. But of course, it doesn't. So I tell Gradle, please refresh, and you get project name Deduplication. So they are prefixed with their parent's name. All right. One important aspect of multi-project builds is that Gradle needs to know where the root project is. That's very simple if you have this standard hierarchical layout, but especially in the Eclipse ecosystem, many people have flat project layouts, so they have their parent project somewhere next to the children, or even completely different project layouts. And then it's harder for Gradle to find, given any subproject, tell me where's the root project. So we need to store this information in every project. And this used to be an absolute path, which made it impossible to share those configuration files. And as many Eclipse users are used to sharing their configuration files in version control, we changed this approach. And as you can see now, the root project directory is now saved as a relative path. So you can now just check in your .project class path and settings files if you want, and share them with your fellow developers, and everything will just work out of the box. Okay, another issue, I would say, with hierarchical multi-project builds is that Eclipse doesn't really know much about the fact that some folders in your project hierarchy are really not interesting to you. I'll just show you what this looks like naively. I have my client and server project, and they are, of course, folders nested inside my parent project. So if we did nothing, then this is how your Project Explorer would look like. You have your sub-projects here, but then you also have them here in the root project as a simple folder. And that is, of course, just noise, just visual noise. So what we did is we added a filter that you can toggle, and you can tell Eclipse, hey, please don't show me sub-projects. And the same also goes for the build folder. Eclipse, please don't show me that build folder. Now, we also did a lot of improvements to the synchronization itself. We're now at a point with 2.14 and Buildship 1.0.16 where we take care of everything in the .project file and most of the things in the .classpath file. And with Gradle 3.0 and Buildship 2.0, we will complete that story. So you can now tell Gradle to add extra project natures or builders to your projects. You can change the Java compiler settings. So here, for instance, I'm going to change the source compatibility to Java 1.6. So as you can see right now, I have a 1.8 JRE on my class path. And if I look at the project properties, then you can see I have 1.8 compliance. So I tell Gradle, please refresh all my projects. And after that change, you can immediately see the change. I now have the Java SE 1.6 version, and all my compliance settings are also correct for Java 1.6. Now, Etienne mentioned that we isolate the class paths, and this is a very important change. We used to do the Eclipse style transitive dependencies. So an upstream project exports dependencies to its downstream project, but that completely defeats Gradle's transitive dependency management and conflict resolution, etc. So what I've done here is I've made a dependency from my client project to the server project. And the server project depends on SLF4J in some certain version, 1.7.21. But my client project absolutely can't work with that one. It has a dependency resolution rule that says, no, I want to force SLF4J 1.7.19 because that doesn't have a bug that 21 has. or whatever. You know, there's many of these problems out there in a real-world project. So what would happen with old Buildship versions is you would end up with both on your class path, because the upstream server project would re-export that SLF4J version to you, and you couldn't get rid of it, which would result in weird runtime errors. But with recent Buildship versions, this problem has been solved. So now you can see the client project depends on the server project, but has 1719 on its class path, and the server project uses 1721. So everybody gets exactly the class path that they would also have in Gradle when you run it on the command line. One minor omission that we hadn't added until recently is also that you can have folders on your class path. So in some projects, you still have checked-in jars, so you can now add those to your class path too. I'm just going to refresh my project here, and then you'll see the lib folder down here is added to my class path of the server project. All right. As I said, as of now, there's still a few things, especially in the class path, that Buildship does not yet transport from Gradle. And so this can sometimes require user interaction. So you do some tweaks to your source folders, for instance. And this is why we made sure that we don't overwrite those manual tweaks that you do. So I'm just going to add another source folder here, for instance. I'm going to say I want source main foo, and then tell Gradle to refresh my project, please. And as you'll see, it doesn't just overwrite or remove whatever I did before. It keeps my manual additions. At some point, as I said, we'll get rid of this. Once Buildship and Gradle transport all this information from your build, then the approach will be you define everything in your build. The build is the source of truth, and Buildship just takes that information, configures Eclipse accordingly, and makes sure that it matches your build one for one. OK, so this is the improvements to the synchronization logic. But not every project is this tame with 5 small, cute subprojects. Quite often, you end up with things that are much, much bigger. So I have an example project here that we use in our own performance tests. It's called Big Ol' Java, and it has 500 submodules. And I'm just going to import that, and you'll get the dialog asking me if I want to keep or override the existing descriptors. So until the dialog pops up, that's Gradle's model fetching time. And after, that's the time that Buildship actually takes to write the descriptor files. And the Gradle core team has done an outstanding job at reducing this configuration time. So you'll see we're really shredding these projects here, 500. It takes about 10 seconds at most if the project is cold. If I've already imported it and I'm refreshing it, it's even faster. So no matter how big your projects are, I would say Buildship can handle them. So there we go. A 500 project multi-module build. And as soon as this dialog is gone, I can start working with it. And I'm not blocked or anything. Now, this also applies to when you restart Eclipse. I'm just going to restart it here. And what used to happen is that we recomputed the class path on startup. And that meant there would be, first of all, that recomputation, and then also an auto build, because JDT would say, oh, hey, your class path changed. Which is, of course, a killer if you have 500 projects with lots of sources. But as you can see here, there's nothing happening, and I can directly start working again. So we cache your class path, and when you restart Eclipse the next morning, everything is just there and ready to go. All right, so that's for simple Java projects, but we also told you that we've done some improvements with regards to web projects. So I'm going to open Eclipse for web developers, also Eclipse Neon with Buildship 1016, and a Gradle 2.14 project. So that's the minimum Gradle version required to make this work. And I have a very simplistic web project here. It has a utility project, so a simple Java project that is used by a web app, and a web app project, depending on this utility. And both the projects have a compile dependency to SLF4J API, so I want them to package that. And they have a compile-only dependency on the servlet API. So I don't want them to package that one because that's provided by my application server. And as you can see, when I open the build path settings, if we look into the external dependencies added by Gradle, you'll see that SLF4J API is marked as deployed to web-in-flip, and the servlet API is marked as please do not deploy this to my war. So you can now deploy your web projects to a server or export a war from Eclipse, and it'll behave exactly like it would if you built on the command line. And then one of the next steps would, of course, be having even deeper WTP integration, which is one of the things we'd like to do in upcoming Buildship versions. So that's the extent that we have gotten with 1.0.16, what you can download right now. And so now Etienne will give you some more insight into what's coming up.
So as you can see, we basically took what's in 1.0 and improved the performance, added more synchronization or better synchronization between what's in your build and what is in Eclipse by taking more of the build configuration into account. And we're going to continue doing this until we are at the point where, like Stefan said, everything that you can configure in your project configuration in Eclipse is defined in the build, because really the build is the only thing that should define your project setup. Right? So you can truly share it and everybody gets the same setup. In parallel to the 1.0x release, we have worked on the Buildship 2.0 release. Of course, there will be more 2.x streams, but the 2.0 is, the key feature is the composite build support. So as you might have seen in the keynote or in the other talk that was specifically about the composite builds, there is support for composite builds now in Gradle Core, and more is being added. And so of course we want to leverage that in Eclipse as well. And it becomes especially important there when you have big projects and you really only work on a subset of those projects, and everything else you don't really want to have the full project into your Eclipse workspace. So what you will have when we're done is you will have dependency substitution. So we'll see that as well. So you have one project, but you don't want to have the full project in your workspace. You will just have the binary output. Project name deduplication, like you saw before, but not only within a project or within a multi-project build, but across multi-project builds. And the third one, and that's the one that's currently missing for us to release 2.0, is to have task execution working in a composite build. Once we have that feature available in Gradle Core, we can leverage it in Buildship, and then we can release 2.0. There have also been made already some class path synchronization improvements to bring them even more in sync, and really can say everything about the class path that is configurable, you configure in your build. There is no more need to do anything by hand in your class path file. Okay. So with that said, we're going to see another demo of Buildship 2.0, as you can already download it from the marketplace.
So I've installed the latest milestone that you can get from our update sites into Eclipse Neon again. And we're going to look at a very simple example of how Composite will feel like. I have two projects, an application and a library. And the application depends on the library. And as is often the case, you might have discovered a bug in your library, which only manifests itself in that application. They're usually developed independently, they live in different repositories, have different release cycles. But if you find this bug, you want to put them both into your IDE and develop them together. You want to do changes in the library and see the effect in the application right away. You don't want to install it into your local Maven repository or whatever, or release a new snapshot version and then try it out into your app. You want to get much faster feedback cycles. So I'm going to import the app here, and if we look at the build file, you'll see it says, I have a compile dependency on my company lib 1.0, and that doesn't even exist in my local repository, so currently that project has a compile error. And now I'm going to import the lib project. It's a completely separate build, so the app project normally knows nothing about it. And it defines a group ID, my company, and a project name, lib. And just using this information, Buildship can link those two together. So you can see now, first of all, my compile error disappeared. And in my application class, I can say new library.hello, and that refers to the library class in my lib project. So now I can work just like if those two projects lived in the same build. So I can do, for instance, refactoring. Or I could start running my tests of the application against a possibly fixed version of the library and see if I really fixed the bug, and then commit them to version control again. What you'll also get from this, apart from dependency substitution, is name deduplication across project boundaries. So it sometimes happens, for instance, that two projects have a subproject with the same name, let's say documentation. It's a reasonable idea to call a subproject docs and have that naming convention in every one of your projects. The problem is just if you start importing several of those independent builds, up until now they would say, oh well, there already is a docs project in your IDE. I can't import this. And there are workarounds for this, of course. You can have, for instance, you can define a custom name for that project. You can have an init script where you just say, hey, make really long names for all my projects automatically to work around this. But with Gradle 3.0 and Buildship 2.0, you'll get a much nicer experience out of the box. I'm gonna refresh here, and you'll see Buildship automatically figured out deduplicated names across those two builds. So this is what you can expect. Once Buildship 2.0 is out, you'll also be able to run tasks from the task view, and it will actually pick up the tasks of the other project. So if you say app run or app compile, it'll first compile the lib project with the changes you made locally in your IDE.
So what's great about this is all going through the tooling API, so it's also open to other IDEs. If IDEA wanted to leverage what we do about composite builds, it would be available to them as well. Right. So with that being shown, what comes after 2.0? What do we plan? This is not a definite list, but this is high on the list, I would say. So one is, like we mentioned before, there's always more and more stuff going into the build that you can configure about your project setup, and there's not much missing, and filling those last few pieces is quite high on the list, such that you really can say the project file never needs to be touched by hand. The class path file is already at that point. The project file will be there very soon. Another thing, as you saw from the keynote, I'm sure, is the Kotlin support and you saw the demos from IDEA or within IDEA. The same is planned to be available in Eclipse. And so the great thing is JetBrains themselves are working on the Kotlin integration, so it's not something we have to do, luckily.
Yes,
and so
JetBrains is working on an Eclipse plugin.
Yes.
Where's the world coming to?
I saw some confused faces here. It's true.
Yep. So there is already a plugin. I'm going to briefly show it if it works. Show you a short demo of the Kotlin integration that's already available in Eclipse. And basically the only thing missing is what you might have seen in Chris Beam's presentation this morning, is really being able to use the build script support and inject into it. So there needs to be some extension points, and then we can make that work. And then bundle it all up in Buildship. And the third one is to provide some kind of integration with Gradle build scans that we have now available. How exactly that looks, well, we're not sure yet, but there's something planned around that, such that you can easily create build scans when you run builds from within Eclipse, such that you really never have to leave the IDE when you work with Gradle or your Eclipse project. Right. So let's see. I had some. Yeah, it's probably the same. I think I'm going to skip it. The resolution is just not good enough on those screens. I just wanted to show you that the Eclipse plugin for Kotlin is working. It has. It's available. It's not the 1.0 release, but it is working. You have code completion. You have navigation. You have some refactoring support. And when you download the slides, you can run that little movie yourself, or you just download the plugin and try it yourself, right? Okay, so that is pretty exciting, because one thing we've always postponed for good reasons is to have that code completion. That was always requested in Buildship. What can you provide code completion, navigation, etc.? And we always said, no, we're not ready yet, because with Groovy, etc. Groovy support basically lacking in Eclipse more and Neon now. There's a lot we would have to do ourselves, and so Kotlin being available now for Gradle build scripts makes this a lot more convenient. We basically don't have to do anything anymore, and you get first-class support for all these things to navigate and edit your build scripts. And also, this is a feature for the build master. It's not typically a feature for the build user, right? And our focus was still around the build user. Right? So let me continue. So with the Gradle build scans, like I'm not sure if you have seen it in the keynote, where we can capture data about your build and present it, visualize it, and you can discover things about your build, explore, and optimize. Right. So let me just show it to you briefly. So we're in Tooling Commons as a library we use between the Tooling API and Buildship, and I can say whatever command I want to run, -d scan, run it. Nothing had to be built basically, or almost nothing, because it was already run before. And then I can go to that URL, and you see what was running, right? Okay. And so what I did right now is I went to the command line, but of course, as you work in Eclipse, you don't want to use the command line. So we're going to give you a way to do all this from within Eclipse and have a nice way to just see the scan. Right. There are other things we could do, and there's a lot of things we would like to do, but there's of course conflicting priorities between Gradle core stuff, Buildship stuff, build scan stuff, and so on. And so there are a few things we could do, it's like preferences API, synchronization when you open the project or when you run certain things, you want to run certain tasks at that time. The runtime class path to fix something around that, and so on. You see them basically listed here. And we have a full list of things we think we should tackle next on our forum. That's where the link is. But if we want to do them, we need some support from the community, right? So if you're interested in some of those features because they're super viable for you, then you can get in touch with us. Maybe we can do some open source partnerships like we've done with various companies in the past successfully. And it becomes available to everyone, right? Okay, so to wrap this up, just to where are the different locations if you're interested in the code and the pull requests, etc. The documentation is on github.com under the Eclipse repository. There is the project itself on Eclipse. So we are an Eclipse hosted project. There's also the marketplace. If you want to get the latest versions, that's where you have to go to. Right. If you have any questions or feedback or whatever, you can go to our forum, the Gradle forum. It is part of the Gradle forum. It's not in the forum on the Eclipse side. We're not making use of this. Yeah, so what I can recommend is that you just get it. So 1.0.15 is out. 1.0.16 is available in the marketplace if you want to get the WT support. And if you want to play around with 2.0, which works except the task execution, so it's in a good state, you can get that as well. Right? And if you want to wait, it will be Neon 1 or Neon 2. Right? So with that said, we're done with the current state of Buildship. Are there any questions? No? Excellent. Well, then have a nice afternoon. Huh?
Actually, stupid question. Is there any planned integration of the Gradle parts with CDT?
no concrete plans. I mean, the question comes up repeatedly, and we could do it, but in terms of priorities, I don't think it will ever, in the near future, get a high priority. Unless for a company it's really important, and then we can do some kind of partnership on it.
I think it's one of those open source partnership opportunities. Again, we didn't list everything that we could possibly do, so this list is open for additions. So if you say, I know a feature that I really need, get in touch, definitely.
Yeah, would be cool.
I think you mentioned this in the keynote a little bit, but talking about what are the plans for bringing parity with idea integration, where do you see strengths and weaknesses compared to the integrations to the different IDEs?
Well, I would say, I would only make one comment, and that is, we are really only leveraging the tooling API and the model. We're only leveraging the tooling API with the models that come with Gradle. We're not using any custom models. We're not doing anything magic, or in that sense that we're injecting a custom init script that loads custom models and so on. So we're just having the standard tooling API and its models, which means that however they are always implemented in the best way, how to capture those models. And to me, that gives us also this really great performance right now that we have. And so I think that is one big advantage of Buildship, that it follows this. IDEA does more in certain areas, but they can only do it. They only do it right now through those custom models being injected, which is nice for the user, but it also leads to certain problems. Right? So ideally, all those things will go into standard models that are supported by Gradle Core, maintained by Gradle Core, and just exposed as typical models. So I think that is the big. On a feature level, I don't think maybe the one feature worth mentioning is, and that's only achieved through those custom models, is you get per source set, you have a different project now in IDEA 16. Right? That's something in Eclipse we don't have. Yeah. So you get class path separation per source set and not per project. Right?
And it's also one of those proposed open source partnership projects. There's a proposal in the JDT mailing list and bug tracker where someone proposed an idea to have a validator that says, okay, here are scopes. This source folder can see these libraries, basically emulating multiple class paths in Eclipse and just putting that on top of JDT without even having to make JDT necessarily aware of that. And we could integrate with that to give you basically the same experience as you have an idea where it tells you, hey, you're accessing a test dependency from your production source code. You shouldn't do that. So it's one of the possible things that we could integrate with in the future. All right.
All right, then have a nice afternoon and a good conference.